Hi, my name is Ansh. I am a documentary filmmaker and I have been for the last 7 years. For the purpose of this talk, though, I'd like to take you back a year. The month was May 2020, roughly 3 months after COVID 19 was declared a pandemic. What began as complete and utter disbelief about the situation we found ourselves in and the devastating effect it was having on the world was starting to transform into something that resembles a mind numbing hum. We'd spent night after night after night consuming numbers, the number of people who were infected, the number of people who were dying, the number of people who were losing their jobs, the number of migrants unable to return home. The numbers kept coming for us every time we turned on the television, opened a newspaper, or logged into Twitter. It was like one harrowing statistic after another until it all just sort of became white noise. It's like when you're living on a quiet street and a single car passes by, and that's enough to wake you up. But if you're living next to the highway, the sound of a million cars sort of transforms into a low, consistent hum that you can peacefully sleep through, and you don't even notice. Not noticing is a dangerous place to be in. Not noticing is a privilege. This phenomena, according to psychologists, is called psychic numbing. The effects of this have been felt across some of the world's biggest natural disasters, wars, atrocities, genocides. As the numbers of victims increased in all of these cases, our willingness to help has usually decreased, which led psychologists to this unsettling realization that the value of a single human life diminishes against the backdrop of a larger tragedy. When you're a documentary filmmaker or a journalist or an activist or a member of a not-for-profit organization like I am right now, and the sole focus of your work is to drive change, to drive action in the face of a crisis, how do you cut through this tension? The flip side of this phenomena is called the singularity effect, which is that an individual life in and of itself is very valued. The plight of an individual affects us a great deal, and we usually go to great lengths to protect a single person or to rescue them from distress. But as the numbers increase, our ability to empathize doesn't quite keep up. In fact, Mother Teresa herself at some point said, "If I look at the mass, I will never act. If I look at the one, I will." In May 2020, as the United States approached 100,000 pandemic deaths, Simone Landon, assistant graphics editor at the New York Times, grappled with a similar problem. By this time, the authorities as well as the people had begun to get desensitized to all of these horrifying statistics and were starting to settle into what we can call a bit of an apathy slumber. So she came up with the idea of compiling obituaries of COVID-19 victims from across the country, big cities and small. Each name was accompanied by one line about the victim. Fred Walter Gray, 75, Washington. Liked his bacon and hash browns crispy. Minette Golf Cooper, 79, Louisiana. Loved big and told people she loved them all the time. Kyra Schwartz, 33, New York. Volunteered for pet rescue organizations. Philip Thomas, 48, Chicago. His Walmart co-workers were like his family. These names and several others filled up the front page of the New York Times, each one a reminder that behind every number stood a real human being that was lost to this pandemic. The front page wasn't even news anymore. It was a statement. It was a call to action. This phenomena isn't unique to our times, though. Estimates say we lost 20 million people in the First World War, close to 80 million in the Second. 6 million Jewish lives were lost during the Holocaust, and over 1 million people were reported to have died during the India-Pakistan partition. And yet these numbers by themselves have historically failed to spark meaningful action. My first emotional response to the partition of India, despite having studied about it in school early in my life, was actually after my grandmother narrated her story to me one summer vacation back when I was a kid. My grandmother, my nanny, is easily one of the best storytellers I know, and she's had a significant impact in not just shaping my most intrinsic personal values, but also my approach to filmmaking. I didn't know it yet, but as my 10-year-old self lay next to her on a warm summer night, listening to stories of her 10-year-old self separated from her family, walking on foot from a village in Pakistan to her new home in India, the seeds of a lifelong obsession with storytelling were being sown. The narrative of the partition is often told through the monumental. Violence appreciated chiefly for its magnitude. Yet, the true story of the subcontinent is very often the story of its people. Ordinary people living in extraordinarily difficult times, experiencing unimaginable personal loss, hurt and pain that runs far deeper than a number can truly capture. When years later I became a filmmaker and it was time for me to fill in the blanks and write the story more fully, I knew I had to look away from these news debates and political rallies. I knew that it was to the memory keepers that I must turn, like the people of Hundarman, a tiny village along the border of India and Pakistan. Following the Indo-Pak War of 1971, Hundarman changed hands overnight. As the borders began to shift, residents ran for cover and several families were separated from their loved ones. In 2017, members of the village embarked on an unlikely enterprise to assemble a museum of memories in an attempt to safeguard their past and leave a legacy behind for those who come after them.
हमने जब म्यूज़ियम बनाया तो मेरी चाचा की बक्सा खोला तो ये सब सामान था। इनमें एक चीज़ पे मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा कि यहाँ पे एक परफ्यूम को बदले। मैंने तो आम परफ्यूम सोचता था। मैं तो यहाँ पे एक टूरिस्ट ने बताया था उस टाइम भी इतना महंगा परफ्यूम यूज़ होता था। मेरे को अच्छा फ़ख्र से महसूस हुआ कि मेरी चाचा भी अच्छा परफ्यूम यूज़ करता था। तो यहाँ पे अलग अलग सामान है, फ्रेंच कॉफ़ी, एस्प्रो, सिंगार मशीन ऑयल, ये फाजेट बॉक्स, सब कुछ है यहाँ पे, क्योंकि हर चीज़ से कुछ यादें जुड़े हैं।
But I am by no means a pioneer in this art form. Several have come before me. The First Day Project, an archive of immigrant voices narrating their first day in America. The 1947 Archive, a rich library of stories from the partition. And of course, Humans of New York. Each of these examples utilizing powerful individual stories set against the backdrop of a larger issue to raise awareness and spark action. But what is it about stories that compels us to respond to them in such a meaningful way? While it's impossible to point at a particular time and place in the history of human evolution at which we first began telling stories, I think it's fair to assume that we've been practicing some form of it since we developed the ability to express ourselves through art or through speech or even through action. For thousands of years, stories have performed two primary functions: to connect and to inform. The urge to tell stories and to listen to them is driven by, first and foremost, a very basic desire to connect with those around us, to find unique overlaps in decidedly distinct personal experiences and use them as the basis of forming deep emotional connections. It's the social glue that holds us together, an inference, by the way, supported by evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar, according to whom about 65% of all human conversation held in public places is usually gossip. But stories also serve a second, even more important function. Long before we gained access to any form of formal education, fables taught us the consequences of our actions, good and bad. They taught us how to survive in the world, how to avoid danger, how to avoid pain, how to prosper. An instruction manual of sorts disguised as fairy tales. A combination of these two functions, to connect and to inform, when used effectively, can activate what are called mirror neurons in our brain, responsible for mimicking activities or emotions we watch unfold in front of our eyes. Scientists believe that these neurons are responsible for enhancing empathy and consequently encouraging generous behavior and sparking action. Today, I'm working for a cause that faces some of the same challenges I mentioned early on. We have a youth mental health crisis upon us, and systems of support have not been able to keep up. Young people are struggling across the world right now, and we must act. To inspire action, I am, once again, looking to rely on stories.
Ok, comment ça se fait qu'on ne sait pas qu'est-ce qui se passe dans la vie de nos amis? Parce que si tu as un de tes amis qui décide de s'enlever la vie, des fois c'est difficile, puis tu es comme, ok, mais qu'est-ce qu'on a fait de mal? Fait que là, automatiquement, c'est comment je peux faire pour pas que ces trucs-là se reproduisent.
They might seem like an old-fashioned tool to us, and that's because they are. But that's also why they're so effective. Stories are and have been woven within the very fabric of our existence for as long as we can remember. And so they can sneak into rooms that numbers are not allowed to enter. Data may be able to wake people up from a slumber, but to pull them out of bed, it is to stories that we must turn. Thank you.